Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Veg Networking Canada. It's important to honor, acknowledge, and respect that many of us are located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of many Indigenous peoples of Canada. Veg Networking Canada is a community where vegan plant-based companies connect and collaborate. Today, we have a special guest who brings over 15 years of marketing experience to the table. She is a champion for all things community and authentic communication with a burning passion for vision and values alignment. Veg Networking Canada is pleased to introduce the founder of Piquant Marketing and co-owner of Planted Expo. Welcome, Lindsay O'Donnell.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, who wrote that bio? Did I write that or was that Sandra? Because it was really good.
We're so happy to have you here with all of us who are live and everybody who's going to be listening whenever it's convenient for them, as these conversations tend to go. So why don't we start off on a personal note? If you could just share more about your own origin story as it relates to plant-based veganism.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that everyone here sees himself a little bit, but I was just like one of those kids in high school where it was like once you started to like discover about climate change and animal rights, you were just like, oh my God, everyone just needs to know about this. If we all just knew, we'll all just change our behavior. And so, yeah, when I was in high school, like I started volunteering with Greenpeace and PETA and EarthSave and like a lot of local organizations. And I went vegetarian when I was 16. And then like basically within a year, I'd cut out everything but fish. And then 15 years ago, I went totally vegan. I just sort of felt like if I was out there like picketing or like protesting, then I and asking big change of the world, I had to like walk the walk and do that change myself. So that's sort of what led me to go vegan. Was I just felt really passionate. I felt like I couldn't ask for big things if I wasn't actually living up to those values myself with my own choices.
Yeah, back to the whole, having a burning passion for vision and values alignment, not only what you do professionally, but personally. So speaking of professionally, in terms of entrepreneurship, that's what Veg Networking Canada is all about, is connecting business owners and entrepreneurs and those with a entrepreneurial spirit. How did your entrepreneurial spirit spark and stoke and begin?
Yeah, I never had a desire to be an entrepreneur. I was like, that sounds stressful. So I guess things really clicked for me. I was sort of like going to school for business and marketing, and then I had this whole activist side. I had a nonprofit that I co-founded, and then I was just like really bouncing around. I wasn't really finding my place. I found things like everywhere I went, I was like, I'm going to like be here and I'm going to move my career up. And, I just sort of, I wasn't able to find a mentor. It just sort of felt like nothing clicked. And then I got a job at Whole Foods Market and it was like literally everything clicked. Like I was like, these are my people. Like maybe not everyone was vegan, but they were using our food as a tool for activism. So, like the produce department, they were really passionate about this like soil auditing system that made sure that like soil was like, it wasn't just totally drained of all its nutrients. And they cared about fair trade. The seafood department, even though they were selling seafood, they genuinely cared about sustainability. So it wasn't exactly how I felt that sustainability should work with seafood, but everyone there like generally had a passion, and food was their tool of connection, love, and activism. And so I was there for 4 years, and I felt like I kind of like reached like my level of potential there. The head office just isn't in Vancouver. And then they had layoffs, and I just sort of felt like, okay, this is a good time. And I just bounced around, and I realized I just really wanted to be in food. And, I had some great people that I worked with, but I just also felt like I was working with a lot of idiots. Like, no disrespect, but like, maybe that's just a lot of arrogance on my part. But I was like, I think I need to try this myself and come back humbled, or in your face, guys. No, just kidding. Or just like succeed. And this was my thing. So I just felt like my career was in somebody else's hands constantly. Like if I wanted to do something fun, it was outside of my pay grade. If I wanted to experiment, it was like, that's off brand. And I just really wanted to do what I did at Whole Foods. I sort of felt like, there's a role for people out there protesting. There's a role out there for people like lawyers writing legislation, but there's also a role for somebody to like support these businesses who are making change. So Piquant was started 7 years ago with a partner of mine who was also at Whole Foods. And after a year and a half is when I found like partnerships, like if they're going to break up, that's when I find a year and a half is when like, that's when somebody realizes like, no, like this is what it's going to be like for a while. And some people are just in or out. And so I went solo, and now we're a full service digital agency. We have about 15 people. We've worked with over 100 brands. We're not an entirely vegan brand. I think all of our clients are mostly vegetarian, but that's what we say we specialize in. And it is something that I sort of think about a lot. Like, when is the time to like draw that hard line, you know, because we have clients that are like we have a restaurant, Jam Jar, and they're fantastic. They have extensive vegan options. And one of their locations just switched to entirely vegan. So I'm like, oh, will we work with them and we can lean into the vegan options and really connect with the vegan community? Or do we say we don't work with you at all? So it's like something I kind of struggle with, but I still love them. Their owner is fantastic. And it's a great place for vegans, but we do everything from online ads to influencer marketing, to social media, to branding and design. Yeah. And then a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, we were asked to do the marketing for Planted. And after a year, I was asked to come on as a partner. And so that really fulfills me, like personally and professionally. And then last year, I also started doing marketing for the Green Party. I sort of felt like, okay, like I feel like I'm missing, like I'm too far from it. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, yeah, I'm doing my part in the activism world, but I felt some things were really stressing me out. And I was like climate change. I'm like, you know what? I feel like if I can like dedicate some time to this, I can be like, I'm doing my thing and put it over there and not stress about it, you know, like, so, yeah, that's my entrepreneurial journey, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Ever unfolding. And so interesting. Originally, like the beginning of your answer was that sounds stressful. And now it's like you got so many different things going on, but you're fulfilled. And that's incredible. And that's amazing. And that's just how the journey goes.
Yeah.
So in terms of the marketing landscape, what are some trends, but maybe even better framing is what are some transformations that you have spotted in the industry over the last 7-8 years?
This is really interesting because I saw this question and I was like, I don't want to do something obvious like AI. Like, AI is something that's very obviously changing the industry. I don't think that anybody here is unaware of it. But what I really find is that social media and a lot of marketing is reaching a saturation point, right? Like, you know, it was in the early days of social media, or when it like anything's in its growth stage, everybody goes in, it's cheap, you're growing. And now it's like heavily monetized and it's still incredibly effective, but it's saturated. And so I think that, you know, post-COVID and with social sort of getting to that point, I think there's a real return to like experiential marketing, connection, and like hyper niche communities. And I'm seeing very little boundaries between like entertainment, advertising, storytelling, celebrity branding, and marketing. Like, tell me the difference between Midday Squares and the Kardashians. You know, like I feel like it used to be like, this is advertising and here's a newspaper ad and here's a celebrity. And I just like, I don't think that there's any difference anymore. I think that all of it is very experiential and fluid. And I think it'll continue to go that way beyond just like some of the obvious trends, like, oh, AI, or like trends in, you know, features of your social media. The other thing that I'm like really seeing is I feel like people are really, I mean, this is obvious, but like, you really can't be a brand that doesn't have a stake in the ground or doesn't have values or isn't political anymore. Like, if you want to connect with your audience, I think that you really have to be like, this is who we are and this is what we stand for. I don't think that you can be like the Switzerland of brands. Like, if something happens, your audience expects you to put your stake in the ground and be like, this is who we support. This is what we stand for. It's been around for a while, but I think it's like even more so.
Interesting and exciting to hear about the blurring of the lines or the blurring of the boundaries, and that's exciting and interesting. Now, in terms of the future for Piquant and or Planted, feel free to like if you feel like you want to set the stage and kind of like walk us up to speed a little bit and to where we are today, and then use that as a launch pad to what the future looks like, or just jump right into what does the future look like for your brand.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of keep a record of like how every year is different for brands. Like, I always just think like the first year is like, what the fuck is happening? You know what I mean? Like, I feel like the first year people are like, how's it going? And you're like, I don't know. I have no idea, like, what's good, you know? And the second year is sort of like, okay, like a little bit of like the first year, just like survive the first year, you know, like unless it's like a total dumpster fire, like the first year is just sort of like, okay, this is really what our marketing plan is realistic. This is really what is a realistic business plan. The second year is much more like, okay, now we have bearings. And year 4 was really where I was like, okay, we have all the assets and now is about refining and increasing. Like, I really don't think you have a strong sense of bearings until year 3 or 4. And like, my God, if I had known that, I would have never gone into business. Like, I'm so happy the things I didn't know, you know what I mean? Like, you start and you're like, you know what, we just need 10 clients at $1,000 a month. And we are laughing. And you're like, we'll do that in 4 months, no problem. And it's like 5 years later, you know? So I really, you know, I've heard some experts say like it takes 7 years for a brand to really establish itself. And so, you know, those first like 4 or 5 years, it really was that, like, it was a big deal hiring our first person. We were kind of like figuring out who we are, and you really have to like adapt to the market. Like, I don't think you can come out and be like, this is what we do. This is who we for. This is who we're for. And this is how we do it. Like, it just is not that structured. Like, our audience changed, we're changed, we changed. The things that we thought were fun or found value kind of evolved, you know, like initially it was really fun for me to do photography and recipe development. And then it wasn't fun and I passed it on. And then it just like didn't make sense for our business. So sort of feels like year 4 to 5 is sort of where you're like, okay, this is like who we are, you know? And so I never had an intention of being like a traditional agency. I have no agency experience. And I'm kind of like, when I see these like big agencies with their awards, I'm sort of eye rolly. And like, maybe it's a little bit of like jealousy or insecurity, but I just like I was never just like, I want to have the Yaletown office, blah, blah, blah. And so in the last 2 years, I've started to just sort of had like a calling of the heart of like, okay, well, who are we? And now that we're like stable enough, how can I really like swing my weight? Like, do I only support vegan brands? And one of the things that I found is there's a big disconnect who our starting audience was and who we've become. So when we started, it was brand new food brands. And now brand new food brands simply can't afford us. Like, it just doesn't make sense. You know what I mean? Like, we're an extensive agency. Social doesn't change, it just expands. So if we did all your social 7 years ago, that was like $1,000 a month. And now it's like, well, there's reels, there's stories, there's threads, there, you know, like, it just doesn't change. So I've found that like getting bigger is much more fun and playful, but I miss that connection. And so I'm launching a membership this September because I really miss the like one-on-one connection. I really miss the cheerleading. I really miss the sense of community. Like, when I do the one-on-one coaching, it's very rewarding. There's a mixture of like cheerleading, spirituality, marketing, and entrepreneurship. And when you're just an agency, it's just one. And when you're coaching, it's just one. And when I'm showing up on social media, it's kind of just one. And I was like, I really want to create like a safe space in one place. All my trainings, guest speakers, like all of this, and a place of love and support and safety. And the final thing I'll say is, because I've also realized that marketing is so emotionally loaded. People either come to us because they're super excited, they're brand new and they've got a ton of money, or they're really stressed and they're like, something has to change, you know? So I realized that like, I wanted to put something out that like sort of addressed both. Like, hey, yeah, here's how you post a reel, but here's like how you like put your purpose in the world. This is how you find your people. And this is how you find your inner peace through the process. So that's sort of where I'm at. Yeah, I think that that's like sort of an update on like where we're going, launching the membership and just having it be like a little bit more like interactive and like feminine in terms of like a safe place, love and support, in addition, because I feel like marketers are a dime a dozen, right? But what makes us like different and unique is the energy and the action, like, yeah, our positioning, but it's that like we care so much and we're so connected and invested in the people that we work with.
Incredible. So to throw a little bit of curveball at you before we get into the charity and the giving back question, talking about Piquant, I looked at it because I'm like, what is that? So pleasantly sharp taste or appetizing flavor, or stimulating or exciting to the mind.
Yeah.
Do you have any comments about like why you chose that for your brand, and or if you have any insights for people looking at creating brand identity, and a super big question, and or like rebranding? I don't know.
Yeah, I really love this question because picking a name is really hard. You know, I actually think picking a baby name is easier. And like side story, when we started, I'd be in meetings with my business partner and I'd be like Piquant, she'd be like Piquant. I'd be like, how are you saying it? Like, even like, I think it's tomato, you know? So some of our clients just call us PQ. So when we started, we were like, well, we know what we want to do, but there's all these hoops you have to go through. Is it available? You know, is it, like, can you get it on social? What's your competition like? What's the search engine like? Is it representative of you? You don't want it to be like too high level. It's pretentious. You don't want it to be like so obvious it's cliche. It's hard. So what we did was we were like, okay, pick 3 that we like. and write a couple taglines, and then we'll send it out to like some people and just be like, what do you think? But we didn't end up sending anything out because we had 3. And then with Piquant, we just kept going. And so that was sort of our process. It is really hard because you can find something you love and then you're like, whoa, Nike's taken, you know? So yeah, it was really challenging, but I liked that it was like really, I felt like it was, yeah, like there was a lot of arms and legs and it was really fun. The other thing is like, we did a rebrand and someone suggested like, change the name. People don't know how to say it. And I was like, well, first of all, like, unless you're something like service-based where people are searching, like, how do I heal my knee injury through like rosemary? Like, I don't think people are searching your name unless they know you. You know what I mean? So I was like, nobody is like, yeah, nobody's searching for Piquant marketing, but if we change it to something else, someone's going to search that. You know what I mean? Like, and I was like, people know it. And I don't think that the name really, like, I don't think people go to the website and they're like, I love this agency. I just can't say the name. So like, next. So I decided to keep the name for that reason. I think that there's other reasons. Like if you're like, okay, we're really in a search engine game. This really is a battle of the search engine. Maybe change the name. Like if you're location based, like where I saw a brand recently that was like, the name of the restaurant was Pizza Close to Me because they knew that like people were searching that. So that was our process. I didn't really take it too seriously. I was like, it's hard to say. It's sort of like people don't know what it is. Because I was like, I don't think that that's like part of the process of people finding us. And I like it. So I was like, no, we're not changing it.
Bingo. Yeah. It's funny because the only reason I'm saying Piquant is because that's how I've heard you say it. And I was like, oh, well, I've always thought, yeah, Piquant. But like you said, who cares? It doesn't matter.
I think I think both are right. I've never heard a definitive answer.
Yeah, definitely tomato, tomato. Okay, so you mentioned some charities at the beginning, but this is the next question. So based on, and charity is transforming. It doesn't mean for a lot of folks what it used to mean, where it's like I give money to the charity, like there's time exchange, like lots of different things. So the question is sort of like, what does giving back or charity mean to you, and or do you or your business support any charitable organizations that you'd like to shout out?
Yeah, this is really hard because I feel like I could probably do a lot of like the way you've described it, charity, and not realize it. I felt like I didn't have a mentor and I was constantly searching for one. Like I think I had a couple like very short term, but generally I was always searching for that. So it's like anybody reaches out to me, I always answer. I'm like, yeah, send me your resume, I'll look at it. Or like, yeah, I'll give you 5 minutes or I'll talk to you for free. So in terms of community, like I feel like it's really important. It comes back to tenfold. In terms of charities, I find it really difficult because it's super overwhelming. And then I feel like I'm not making a difference. You know, you're like, oh my gosh, climate change. Okay, well, like the Amazon rainforest. Oh, wait, like, you know, I feel like I'm like, I get really overwhelmed. And then like at the end of the year, I'm like, I don't feel like I've actually done anything. And so I was like, I'm going to pick a couple organizations and just really be like, that's my organization. So I love Black Mambas, which is like female, they're like female anti-poaching unit in Africa, which is like so badass. And then Dogwood is local here in BC. And like pipelines like really get me riled up. And so I was like, okay, like do that. And then I do support UNICEF. But I mean, I love all the local organizations, you know, the ones, I forget what it's called, something like Growing Chefs, where they go into schools and teach kids how to like cook. So yeah, but I also think it's important, like, you know, like I don't think it was a charity, but to be mindful about where we're spending our money and gifts and things like that. So like last year we did the Indigenous box for all our clients, which is like an Indigenous subscription box and it's all Indigenous brands. So yeah, I just think that if there's like places we can spend a big bulk of money or highlight, like why not make it meaningful? Is it loud? There's like someone cutting down a tree outside. Can you hear me?
You sound clear, and I honestly, I don't know what everybody else thinks, but I can't hear anything else in the background. Sounds great.
Okay, good.
Yeah, totally. Oh, that's great. So, okay, so the next one is about resources. Typically, people think of books, apps, podcasts, documentaries, websites. But one thing that you've mentioned a couple times has been mentors. And so maybe that's like a resource point that you want to touch on. But the whole point of this question is, are there resources that have helped you in your journey that you think, whether you think people have already heard of these resources or not, might help them as well?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, I did sign up for a mentorship. I think that's like the Female Entrepreneur Network in BC, and I got really lucky. It was funny. I got matched with Becky, who co-founded Fresh Prep, which is like an amazing connection. But honestly, when she got matched with me, I was like, I honestly just need somebody to tell me it's going to be okay. You know, I was like, I just need someone a couple years ahead of me. And then one thing I've heard from a lot of marketers, and I'm starting to do myself, is just like host intimate dinner parties. I did one this past week where I invited 7 people to Folk, and we were there for like 5.5 hours. I'd really recommend reading The Art of Gathering. And it just talks about like how to host a really great event and have it with intention and how to moderate it. So it's like, I'm going to have a dinner party. I'm going to give everyone like a question so they can come to the table and talk about like what they're working on or something they had learned recently. Stephen from Planted is really good at that. And I think that, you know, I think that's much more effective than like the mass networking with business cards. In terms of books, podcasts, apps, like I generally like the like non-marketing stuff. I feel like some people really love the like, this is the latest Instagram update. And like, this is like how hashtags work, where I'm like, I kind of like the like, oh my gosh, like how is Midday Squares growing so much? Like, what is it like? What is it that they're hijacking? They're copying a celebrity formula. Like they've said, we're the Spice Girls of chocolate, and like we're the Spice Girls, and we're like the chocolate is our merch. Like I love being like, oh my gosh, how can we hijack something that's like in a totally different industry? In terms of podcasts, like Gold Digger by Jenna Kutcher, she's like a really big marketer, so she talks a lot about strategy and content creation. She kind of does everything from like, here's Instagram hacks to email marketing. Marketing School is like a 5-minute daily podcast, and that's much more like, this is Twitter's update, or this is like Elon Musk's strategy. And I have some books. So I don't know if you've heard of Russell Brunson, but all of his books are free, and his whole thing is funnels and webinars. Even if you're not in that industry, I find it really, really, really interesting because he talks a lot about psychology. Like a random interesting fact he'll like say is like, when you're giving a webinar, ask questions so people like unconsciously nod yes, and then they're more likely to like respond to your offer at the end. So, you know, I don't really do a ton of webinars and sales tactics the way he does, but I do find like a lot of those tricks really interesting. I feel like a teacher. The other one is Paul from Just Tea recommended Get Different. Honestly, this is like amazing. I think I've read it twice. It's a lot like Seth Godin's stuff, and his whole thing is like, marketers call it all different things. They call it like the purple cow is what Seth Godin calls it, or something else. But it's basically like, the idea is like, you know, say you're like driving by farm after farm after farm, and you see cows, and then all of a sudden you see a purple cow. It's like the same thing, but different. Like, how can you be the purple cow? Like once people get like acclimatized to a certain type of messaging, how can you just like be different? Get different. And then the final one is like not a marketing one, but I love the Greenpeace book for marketing. Honestly, it's so fascinating how the brand sort of like started, but then also how it fell apart. Like in the sense of like, they started this like big organization and it was all about PR. But then what happened is like, they were out with the ships and offices all around the world popped up. And then they would come back from their big PR stunts and they'd be like, well, where's all the money that you collected? And each location was like, well, we're not giving you the money. We raised this for our local efforts. And the founders were like, but you raised the money because we were out like getting this huge PR. That's how everyone knows about you. And so it was really interesting in terms of like, if you focus so much on one area and not focus like the nuts and the bolts and the scaling, like what can result. So I thought that was really interesting. And then a couple more, just 5-Minute Marketing is a podcast. And I listened to like the first 10 episodes. It's like the same concept, but it's really interesting. And then there's a very technical one called Perpetual Traffic, where they talk about like ads and Google updates and things like that.
Wow.
Is that enough?
Yo, yeah, that is absolutely enough. Thank you so much for sharing. Probably, you know, a lot of people like me listening to some of those recommendations haven't quite hit our radar yet. So that's great. Now, super loaded question centered around inspiration. So again, it's kind of like the charity question in that you can talk about individuals or organizations, or even like we've had guests talk about nature as like a source of inspiration. And then other guests who have done that and or talked about inspiration more philosophically, like what does it mean, internal, external. So quite a big question centered around inspiration. You can take it how you want.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm like a pretty high energy person. So I feel like some like things that amp me up are just like things that are like totally outside the marketing world. There's a woman who does something called like tapping meditation. And she's got like hot pink hair. She wears all pink, but her marketing is always so interesting to me. Her name is Gala Darling, because she does courses, she's got books, but the people are like very, very loyal to her. And it's so interesting the way she's able to like to connect with our audience, and the add-ons that she's able to do authentically are really interesting to me. A Midday Squares is really interesting to me because I think that they're like, they've said they want to have a reality show. That is like not a path gone by. Like generally, if an entrepreneur has a reality show, they're already like Richard Branson. Their whole thing is like, no, like as we're growing, like this is part of it. They capture everything from like their therapy sessions to like, I think that like they've said, like if you work for us, you kind of have to adapt to the culture. There's cameras everywhere because it's all going to be a part of our marketing. The Barbie movie, obviously, Sandra, has been brilliant. And then I get just like really hyped up on activists like Paul Watson, or, you know, even Ingrid Newkirk is like really interesting to me. So seeing something that's like totally different and splashy really catches my attention. It doesn't have to be a ton of money. I just think it has to be like really clever. I would say Ben and Jerry's is like really, really interesting to me because they've really, more than any brand, have really stuck by their values of like social justice. And they seem to do it in a way that's like interesting and also like extremely, like they're so good at catering to their audience and being like, if you're not our audience, like we don't care about you. They're not afraid of pissing people off in such a good way that it makes their audience so much more like loyal and fanatical.
Now, when it comes to the environment, animals, anything like that, any sources of inspiration on that specific side of things?
I mean, there's Paul Watson, who I love. One thing I'll say about like someone local, Erin Ireland, is like, one thing I don't think people really give her credit for is like very rarely, and this isn't a knock on anybody, very rarely is somebody so good at being like a celebrity in person as online. Like she is somebody who will like remember your kid's name, look you in the eye, and make it seem like she's got all the time in the world. And so that's like, I don't know if that's marketing or just like being a great person, but that's really impressive and really hard. So I would say like those two. I think, what was the company recently, Patagonia, where the owner just like gave it away. And I really love their marketing where they're like, this shirt, we don't want you to buy another shirt. The other marketing that I find, and I talk about this a lot on my page, which I find so interesting and compelling because it's so unexpected, is Cards Against Humanity. Like their whole tagline is, we're a brand for terrible people, but they're actually one of the most giving and probably like impressive brands that I've seen. Like if you actually spend time on their page, they have scholarships, they have pub nights in the community, they're supporting local artists. Like it's interesting because they're like, our humor is for terrible people. It gives them complete freedom by just saying, hey, we're terrible people. But in actuality, if you spend any time with their brand, they have all these like arms and legs. It's so interesting. I mentioned them once on my tiny TikTok, and they sent me a box of all their different games and cards. So I think that that's pretty interesting in terms of activism, where they're sort of like, yeah, we don't fucking care what you think, but in actuality, we are doing like a ton of really good things.
Cool. All right. So before we jump into the last question, which again, pretty big question centered around like wisdom, lessons, tips, advice. But before we jump into that, there's a question here from someone in the community. What are some do's and don'ts you'd advise food brands just getting into retail? There are so many who I think would benefit from knowing what to focus on or what not to do.
Yeah. Retail is really hard. Not that you shouldn't do it. But I think like, unless you're in the food industry, like, unless you know, I feel like people have this perception, like we're in retail, done, you know? And so I really think that like, when you get into retail, a lot of the work starts where you like have to be in there demoing, you have to be connecting with your community. I think having worked at Whole Foods, like having a really good relationship with the people in the store makes a difference. Like the people in the front lines are the ones who customers ask questions. They're the ones who decide who goes in the deli. They're the ones who like put together the end caps. They're the ones who decide who to call for the events, right? Like when I worked at Whole Foods, we always called Vega. They were always game. They always showed up. They always answered our calls, and we just knew. So it's like, how can you be top of mind like that? We also had morning huddles where we would be like, okay, this is our day. But sometimes brands would come in and be like, try our product. So it's like not sexy. It's labor intensive, but it must be done. So I would I would say like, you know, retail, there is just like a lot of heavy lifting. The times that I don't see it work are oftentimes when like a Canadian company is like, we want to target LA and we need a bunch of Facebook ads. And it's just like, it's a little too disconnected, you know, not that it's impossible. I think you can build enough momentum so you get to a point. But I'd like brands that I think have done it really, really well are like Yogu. You know, they've spent years at farmers markets, adjusting, listening, getting to know their community. By the time they hit retail, there was such a strong wave of support, which sucks. I know a lot of people are like, I want to get into retail now. I can. I'm not saying don't. I'm just saying that someone like Yogu has built such a strong pillar of support that getting into retail, I don't think was this big, expensive thing. It was like she had already built that momentum.
Okay, that's a great answer. So the foundation, it's like more about what you do. If you're just about to get into retail, it's more about what you do before that to make that, I guess, easier. But what you said really struck me, and I don't know if it's for other people as well, but it's essentially viewing the retailers less of a conduit to use and view them more as people and part of your community, so you can build a relationship and have more influence with them. So treat them well instead of just kind of seeing them as a conduit to use. That's really interesting. And I know some brands are doing that really, really, really well. Okay, so last question for you, Lindsay. Wisdom, lessons, tips, advice. You know, some of our guests don't like framing it as, hey, I don't really want to give advice, but everybody's different. Any advice, wisdom, lessons, tips that you want to give to people who might be an entrepreneur already? They might be fresh. They might be 7 years in, or they might be working at a company with a burning passion saying, this is something that I want. So you're speaking to a wide swath of people here. Take it away.
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake I see, and this is like particularly valuable for like vegan brands, are people shying away from their core audience or like their purpose, in the sense of, you know, we've worked with a lot of vegan brands who are like, well, we want meat eaters to eat this too, so we don't want to like lean too heavily into it. And I'm like, that is your audience. Like, that's why you exist, you know? So why would you like create this brand to service vegans? This is a like mobilized, passionate, loud group. And you're like, well, I don't want to just go for them. I want you to think of like that audience as the center of your ripple. So I think a lot of people look at like Beyond Meat and they're like, everybody eats Beyond Meat. I want to be Beyond Meat. But I'm like, I'm telling you, Beyond Meat was known in the vegan community while they were like doing rounds of fundraising. They were known as they were about to hit the shelf. Like, I can tell you, vegans were loud and annoying the minute they got an A&W or whatever it is. And then it rippled out. Beyond Meat didn't spend time trying to convince like my dad to eat their burgers. No, they got the vegans and the health, like the people who were so excited about it. It's not healthy, but you know what I mean? Like the people who were looking for it, so excited that like my dad couldn't ignore it. And so the biggest mistake I see is like people toning down the strength of their voice, the edge of their voice, who they're talking to, because they're afraid of like, repelling a greater audience of people, but it just doesn't work like that. Like, it's so cliche, but you try to appeal to everybody, you appeal to nobody, because it's like, it's too competitive. And so there's one final thing I was going to say about that. And I think that people fail to acknowledge that, like, I think people like go to these marketing seminars or they see inspiration and they get all riled up. And I think that they forget that like, there's a certain level of discomfort that comes with like pressing publish. Like, it's one thing to get all excited, like, yeah, we're gonna like cater to our audience, yeah, we're gonna swear in our marketing, we're gonna be unauthentically ourselves. But then it's like you press publish and there's fear and there's risk, and all of a sudden you get the negative comments, and it's like you are going to have that urge to pull back. There's going to be stakeholders in your brand and company who are going to disagree, and you're going to have to go through it. Like for Planted, we did this campaign. I know you guys know it. 2 years ago, we were like, let's like wink at our audience, because like vegans like know the stereotypes and we can laugh at them. And so we did this like campaign where it was like, Planted, don't worry, you don't have to wear Birkenstocks. You know, like the whole idea was that vegans could look at it and be like, oh my God, this is ridiculous. But then maybe non-vegans would look at it and be like, laugh. But instead, people were sharing the ad in vegan groups who were arguing. People were like, I'm going to buy a ticket and I'm going to come yell at your marketer. And I was like, you're going to buy a ticket though, right? And I was like, you're sharing the ad. Like, do you not, you know? And people were like, I can't believe this. They should be saying welcome home vegans. And so anyway, I woke up every morning to screenshots from like my partners and my marketing team being like, people are still raging about this. They're so upset, but it was our highest converting ad. People bought the most tickets from that. So I think you need to remember that oftentimes the loudest people are still going to continue to support you. They're just loud. but if you don't push it, you might not get that outer ring. So do not be afraid to like lean in to who you are and who you serve at the expense of who is not your audience.
Amazing, amazing. So that wraps up all the questions that we have. So before we let people know your website and your Instagram and where they can connect and learn a little bit more, is there anything in this conversation that you want to double back to that maybe we missed, or anything else that hasn't been discussed that you want to touch on? The floor is yours.
Not that I can think of. I mean, I'm always available. You can always find me on Instagram, LinkedIn, all the places you guys are that we talk every day.
All right, great. Well, everybody, you can find out more, Piquant, however you want to say it, piquantmarketing.com. There's really only one way to spell that word, Piquant, piquantmarketing.com, or Piquant Marketing, at Piquant Marketing on Instagram. So this has been another episode of Veg Networking Canada, where we had a great conversation with the founder of Piquant Marketing and co-owner of Planted Expo, Lindsay O'Donnell. Everybody, we will catch you soon for another episode of Veg Networking Canada. Take care. Bye for now.
Thank you.